My name is Anina. I was only 14 when my life changed forever. I lost my two parents in a terrible fire, and that's when it all started to collapse. I became a prostitute at a tender age, something I would never have thought possible for me. Here's my story, and I want you to listen to it carefully because what happened to me happens to so many other girls. It's a painful story, but it contains important lessons. Please listen to it to the end and try to understand how I got there. Once upon a time, I had a wonderful life. I lived in a peaceful village with my beloved family. There was my father, my mother, and my older sister. We were so happy together. We lived in a big house full of laughter and love. It was the best days of my life. My father was rich and generous. He always made sure that we had everything we needed. My mother was adorable and attentive. She made the house warm and welcoming. My older sister was my best friend. We played together, laughed together, and shared all our secrets. Every day was filled with joy. We sat around the table to eat the delicious meals that my mother prepared. My father told us funny stories, and we laughed together. My sister and I ran in the garden playing games and having fun. Life was perfect. Our house was big and beautiful. We had everything we needed and even more. But above all, we had each other. We were a happy family, and I felt so lucky to be part of it. But I didn't know that everything was going to change. Happy days would not last forever. Laughter and joy were soon to be replaced by sadness and tears. My wonderful life was going to be upset. A dark and terrible night, everything changed. I was sleeping peacefully when I heard a loud noise. I woke up and smelled smoke. My heart began to beat fast. I ran out of my room and saw flames everywhere. Our house was on fire. The flames were ferocious and uncontrollable. They burned so hard and so intensely. I tried to find my family. I shouted Mom, Dad, Sister, but I couldn't see them. The smoke was thick and it was difficult to breathe. I ran through the house trying to save them, but the fire was too strong, the heat too intense. I couldn't reach them. I wanted to save them, but I couldn't. The fire took everything from me. I lost my father, my mother, and my sister in this terrible fire. My beautiful house was gone. Everything was gone. I was left alone, with nothing but my sadness and my fear. I cried and cried. The pain was too great to bear. I felt so lost without my family. Memories of that night still haunt me. I can still see the flames and hear the crackling of the fire. I can still feel the fear and the sadness. Since that night, my life has never been the same. I was no longer the happy girl with a loving family. I was an orphan, alone in the world. The fire took everything from me, and I didn't know how I could be happy again. Shortly after the tragedy, a woman named Aunt Binta came to our village. Aunt Binta was rich and famous for helping orphan girls. She had a big house in the city and was always wearing beautiful clothes. Everyone in the village respected her. When Aunt Binta heard about my loss, she came to see me. She looked at me with kind eyes and said, "Oh, Tanina, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. Losing your family is very difficult, but don't worry, I can help you." She promised to take me to the city. "In the city, you will have a better life," she said. "I will take care of you. You will go to school, and you will have many opportunities. You will be happy again." I really wanted to believe her. Aunt Binta seemed so kind and attentive. She told me about the wonders of the city. "You will see large buildings, bright lights, and a lot of people. It will be so different from the village. You will love it," she said. She promised to give me everything I needed. "You will have beautiful clothes, good food, and a warm bed to sleep in. You will never have to worry about anything again," said Aunt Binta. These promises seemed so wonderful. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. The sadness in my heart seemed a little lighter. I started hoping that my life could be good again. At first, I didn't want to go there. I was afraid, and I wasn't sure. The village was the only place I had ever known. The idea of leaving everything behind made my heart heavy. I didn't know what the city would be like, and I was afraid of the unknown. But my friends, Hugo and Adona, helped me see things differently. They came to see me one afternoon and said, Tanina, you should go with Aunt Binta. There is more in life than our village. You have a chance to do something for yourself. Hugo looked at me with kind eyes and said, Tanina, you deserve a better life. Aunt Binta can help you. She can give you opportunities that you will not find here. You must be brave. Anina shook her head and added, think about your future, Tanina. In town, you will be able to go to school and learn so many things. You'll be able to have a new start. Don't let fear hold you back. Their words gave me strength. I realized they were right. The village had too many sad memories and I needed to find a way to move forward. Maybe Aunt Binta's promises could come true. Maybe I could be happy again. After much thought, I decided to trust Aunt Binta and leave the only place I had ever known. I packed my bags and kissed my friends to say goodbye to them. Hugo and Anina smiled, their eyes full of hope and encouragement. Walking with Aunt Binta, I turned around one last time to look at my friends. Their encouragement filled my heart with hope. I was afraid, but I was also ready for a new start. I hoped the city would bring me the happiness and opportunities that Aunt Binta had promised. When I arrived in the big city, I was amazed. It was so different from the village, so bright, so noisy, and so full of life. The streets were filled with people, cars, and large buildings everywhere I looked. There were bright lights and colorful signs. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Aunt Binta's house was huge and beautiful. It had large grills, a large garden, and many rooms. I thought it was going to be the place where all my dreams would come true. But as I entered, something didn't seem right. I noticed the other girls that Aunt Binta had picked up. They lived in a small, cramped room at the back of the house. They were dressed in a way that made me uncomfortable. Short skirts, tight tops, and a lot of makeup. They looked so different from the girls in the village. I didn't understand why they were dressed like that. They didn't look happy, and their eyes looked sad and tired. I felt a strange feeling in my stomach, but I refused to think about it. I wanted to believe Aunt Binta's promises. Aunt Binta welcomed me warmly. She showed me a nice room, much better than the one where the other girls were. You are special, Tanina, she said. You will live with me like a little sister. I was happy to be well treated, but I couldn't help but think of the other girls. Why was she living in such a small room? Why did she look so sad? But every time I had these thoughts, I thought to myself, maybe that's just how it is in the city. The days went by, and I relaxed Binta with household chores. I cleaned, cooked, and did everything she asked me to do. She was nice to me, and I started to feel a little more comfortable. But the concern about the other girls never completely disappeared. I tried to talk to them, but they were silent and didn't say much. They seemed frightened and always looked over their shoulders. I didn't understand, but I thought maybe they were just shy. I wanted to believe Aunt Binta's promises. I wanted to believe that she had brought me here for a better life. So I pushed away the feelings of discomfort, and I focused on my new life in the big city. I hoped that soon everything would make sense, and that I would find the happiness I was looking for. At first, Aunt Binta treated me well. She called me her little sister, and I felt special. She gave me beautiful clothes and good food. I thought it was perhaps the beginning of a better life. But soon, the promises she had made to me began to crumble. Instead of going to school, I was kept at home to do chores every day. I cooked, cleaned, and took care of the house. I woke up early and worked until 8. I mopped the floors, washed the dishes, and did the laundry. I felt like a servant, not like a little sister. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The life that Aunt Binta had promised seemed so far away. I saw other children from the neighborhood going to school with their backpacks and their books. I felt sad and lost. Why wasn't I going to school? I gathered the courage to ask Aunt Binta about the school and the opportunities she had promised. One evening, after finishing my tasks, I found her in the living room. Aunt Binta, I said gently, you promised to send me to school. When am I going to start? She looked at me with a kind smile and said, Tanina, don't worry, you are still young. The time will come. Just be patient. These words gave me a little hope. I wanted to believe in her words, so I clung to that hope, even if I continued to work from morning to night every day. I cleaned, cooked, and took care of the house. I did my best to stay positive, thinking that maybe tomorrow would be the day when Aunt Binta would send me to school. But as the days went by, my hope began to fade. The other girls never went to school, and I began to wonder if I would go one day. I saw them leave the house in the evening, dressed in elegant clothes, looking sad and tired. I didn't understand where they were going or why they were so unhappy. I began to feel a deep sadness in me. My family, my village, and the simple joys of my past life were missing. The city, which once seemed full of promises, now looked like a place of broken dreams. One day, as I was rubbing the floor of the kitchen, I thought of my mother and my father. They had always wanted the best for me. They wanted me to receive an education and have a bright future. What would they think if they saw me now? I felt tears rising in my eyes, but I wiped them quickly. I didn't want Aunt Binta to see me cry. I had to stay strong, even if I felt so weak inside. Deep down, I began to wonder if things would get better one day. Would I go to school one day? Would I have the opportunities that Aunt Binta had promised me one day? The questions resonated in my mind, but I had no answer. I tried to stay hopeful, but it was difficult. The promises that once seemed so real now seemed distant dreams. I felt lost and alone, trapped in a life that was not at all the one I had hoped for. As I continued my tasks, I whispered to myself that maybe things would change one day. Maybe one day I would find the happiness I had known. But deep down, I was starting to lose faith. The life I had hoped for seemed so far away, and I didn't know if I would reach it one day. When I was 15, Aunt Binta called me into her room. She smiled and said, "Anina, it's time for me to fulfill one of my promises. I have an opportunity for you that will help you make money." I was so excited. I thought it was finally my chance. Maybe she was going to send me to school or give me a special job. My heart was full of hope and happiness. The next day, Aunt Binta told me to prepare my things. "We're going somewhere special," she said. I quickly packed my suitcase, my mind overflowing with dreams about what the future could hold for me. I imagined myself in school uniform, learning new things, making new friends, and building a bright future. We got in Aunt Binta's car and crossed the city. I looked out the window, observing the buildings and the people passing by. My excitement grew every moment. Finally, we stopped in front of a large, magnificent house. Aunt Binta took my hand and led me inside. A rich man named Chief Aniculapo welcomed us. He smiled at me, but there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. Aunt Binta spoke to him for a moment, then turned to me. "Anina," she said, "you're going to stay here. Chief Aniculapo needs someone to help him with the household chores. It's a great opportunity for you to make money and have a better life." I felt discomfort in my stomach. That was not what had been promised to me. I thought I was going to school, not to become a servant. I looked at Aunt Binta with tears in my eyes. "But Aunt, you said I was going to school," I murmured. Aunt Binta's smile faded, and her voice became severe. "It's the best I can offer you for now. You should be grateful for this opportunity," she said. Then she turned around and left, leaving me alone in the big house. I felt betrayed and heartbroken. It was not what I had hoped for, not what I had dreamed of. I was not going to school. I did not have the opportunities that Aunt Binta had promised. I was just a servant working for a rich man in a house that did not look like a home. The days that followed were difficult. I worked from morning to evening, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of the house. Chief Aniculapo and his wife were demanding and sometimes unkind. I felt like a prisoner, stuck in a life that I did not want. Every night, I cried to fall asleep, thinking of my family, my village, and the promises that had been broken. I felt so alone and so far from the happiness that I knew before. My dreams of a better life seemed distant memories, and I did not know if I would ever find a way to escape from them in Chief Aniculapo's house. I worked every day from morning to evening. I ran errands, cleaned every corner, prepared meals, and did everything I was asked. My hands were always busy, and my heart was heavy with sadness. But the most difficult part was not the endless tasks, it was Chief Aniculapo, the master of the house. He began to put me in uncomfortable situations, and I felt powerless to oppose him. I cried and asked him to stop, but it did not seem to worry him. One day, When his wife came back from a trip, I tried to explain to him what was going on, tears in his eyes. I told him, Madam Alice, Chief Aniculapo is putting me in a difficult situation. Please help me. She looked at me coldly and replied that it was part of my service. Since we had paid for it, she could do what she wanted. These words deeply affected me. I felt so alone, so stuck. I realized that there was no one to help me, no one to protect me. These 6 months have been the darkest of my life. Every night, I endured the pain and humiliation, and during the day, I worked relentlessly, trying to erase the memories of the night. I felt like a prisoner in this big house without escape. I thought of my family and the happy days in the village, the joy of laughing with my father, the warmth of my mother, and the friendship of my sister were missing. I wanted to be able to come back to those days before the fire, before the broken promises of Aunt Binta, but there was no going back. I was stuck in a nightmare, and every day seemed like an eternity. My heart was overwhelmed by sadness and fear. I wondered if I would ever find a way out, if I would ever be freed from this terrible life. I clung to a small glimmer of hope, a spark deep inside me. I told myself that one day things would improve, that one day I would find a way out. But for the moment, I had to endure. I had to survive, even if every day I felt my mind break a little more. When my stay at Chef Aniculapo came to an end, Aunt Binta came to pick me up. I felt a little hope, thinking that maybe things would change, maybe she would care about what I had experienced. As soon as we got home, I told her everything that had happened, every painful detail, hoping that she would understand and help me. But Aunt Binta just looked at me and said, "Sorry, Anina." Then she went to something else as if my words didn't matter. She had already brought another girl to take charge of the tasks at Chef Aniculapo. My heart melted. I realized that in her eyes, I was just another girl to use. She sent me to live with the other orphan girls in a small, cramped room. The room was cold and dark, full of sadness and despair. I had seen the other girls before, but now I was one of them. We were all prisoners, without an exit. That's when my life as a prostitute began. Every night, Aunt Binta dressed us in revealing clothes and took us to the streets. She found men ready to pay for our services, and we had no choice but to follow them home. The first time this happened, I felt a deep shame and a degradation. I couldn't believe it was my life. I felt so degraded, so useless, but there was no escape. During the day, we were locked in the house, and at night, we were sent to work. Aunt Binta made sure that we could not escape. The house was like a prison, and she was the guardian. Every night was a nightmare. Men treated us like objects, indifferent to our feelings or our pain. I felt my mind break a little more at every meeting. I tried to hang on to a little hope, but it was so difficult. I remembered Aunt Binta's promises. She had promised me a better life, a chance to go to school, to have opportunities, but her promises were all lies. My life was now filled with darkness and despair. My family missed me more than ever. The days when I felt loved and safe were missing me. I wanted to be able to come back to those days before the fire, before the broken promises of Aunt Binta, but it was impossible to go back. My reality was now this life of misery and pain. Every night, walking down the streets, I prayed for a way out. I prayed for a miracle. I hoped that one day someone would come to save me, but in the meantime, I had to survive. I had to go on, even if each part of me wanted to give up. One night, as I was standing in the street with the other girls, a man named Dan chose me. He seemed different from the others. He had kind eyes and a soft smile. As we walked together, he asked me why I was doing this. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe to tell my story. I told him about the fire that had taken my family, the broken promises of Aunt Binta, and the terrible things I had endured at Chief Aniculapo. I told him how Aunt Binta had forced me into this life, and how much I felt prisoner and desperate. Dan listened to me carefully, his eyes full of compassion. "I'm really sorry, Anina," he said softly. "No one should live what you have lived." His kindness gave me a little glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he would help me. We arrived at his house, and he invited me in. Unlike other men, he did not rush and did not make me uncomfortable. He offered me something to eat and drink, and we sat down in his living room to chat. I felt a warmth that I had not felt for a long time. Dan treated me like a human being, not like an object. He did not force himself on me and did not scare me. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the glow of hope. As the night progressed, I felt exhausted by the emotions and the long day. Dan noticed it and said, "You can rest here. I will not bother you. You're safe." I hesitated at first, but his gentle behavior reassured me. I lay down on the couch in the living room, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. Dan left me alone and went to his room, closing the door behind him. I fell asleep quickly, comforted by the thought that there might still be goodness in this world. But I did not know that my night was going to take a dark turn. When I woke up, I realized how much I had been wrong. The room seemed different, darker, filled with a strange silence. I rubbed my eyes and saw Dan standing in the corner, dressed in strange clothes, a red robe and a white scarf. He was holding a small calabash in his hand, and his eyes were cold and threatening. Fear invaded me when I realized that Dan was not the nice man I thought he was. He was a ritualist, and he had planned to use me for something dark and evil. My heart was beating wildly as I tried to understand what was happening. I jumped off the couch, desperate to escape. I ran to the living room door, but as I reached it, I saw Aunt Binta standing there, dressed like Dan, with a sinister smile on her face. My blood froze. She had trapped me, and there was no escape. "Aunt Binta, why?" I cried, my voice trembling with fear. She looked at me with contempt and said, "Do you think you can escape? Tanina? You belong to us now." What happened next is difficult to express. The room was dark and I was surrounded by this man, all dressed in ritual clothes. Candles flickered around us, casting strange shadows on the walls. It looked like a nightmare, but I knew it was real. Aunt Binta and the men began to sing strange words, and the men approached me. I cried, begging to be let go, but they ignored my calls. I felt a paralyzing fear as he took me and pulled me to the center of the room. I closed my eyes, trying to block what was happening, but the noises and smells were overwhelming. I prayed for a miracle, for someone to come and save me, but no help came. My body trembled with terror, and I felt totally alone and powerless. The events of that night left scars on my soul that will never heal. This is only the beginning of what has changed my life forever. Did I find a way to escape? Did help come, or did a miracle come that changed the course of my life? The answers to these questions will be revealed in the next part of my story, so subscribe and stay tuned to find out what really happened that night in the dark room with Aunt Binta, Mr. Dan, and the 7 men around me. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon in part 2.